Hey guys, Mr. Weinland here. Recording a video for cinema history. First and foremost, I'm really disappointed that we weren't able to finish this class together. I really enjoyed that class, cinema history. It's one of my favorites. I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys really enjoyed how I was going about it. Some of you didn't care so much. That's fine. It's okay. But I really missed all of y'all and really missed the class and the direction we were going. I was going to really open it up for you guys once we were done with drama to kind of open up different categories. And so I'm just really disappointed we couldn't do that. I am going to kind of recreate some old genre stories. I might go into and do a PowerPoint presentation about sports movies. It just kind of depends. But we're going to do history of animation. And I thought, this would be kind of good for you guys to learn and understand, especially some of you who may love animated films. Some of you may not like animated films. That's fine. It's okay. They're important and they have a role. But for your assignment, it's on the Google form on the Google Classroom page. So here are the questions. The best thing to do is get a piece of paper out, a pen and a pencil. Go ahead and pause the film or the video, and then you can write down all the questions and then answer them as you go, and then you can just type your answers in Google Forms. If some of you can't access Google Forms, there is a packet at the school, so you can go ahead and get them there. But these are the different questions. We're going to talk about each one of them. What were the first forms of animation before film? What animated characters were the first in cinema history? What was the golden age of animation? Why was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs so important? What were some of the hit shows on TV in the 60s and 70s? Same with 80s to now. And what studio changed the game for not just Disney, but every animation studio in Hollywood? And then number 8, I'll explain a little bit more at the end about watching an animated movie at home. I know a lot of you have time. You can watch a movie. Trust me, you have some time. Anyway, moving on, let's go ahead and talk about animation and its history. So again, some of this is going to be a little bit of review. We've already talked about this in class. We've already kind of went into this conversation when we were talking about the beginning of cinema. We have to understand a lot of the history of animation goes all the way back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. There was new inventions being formed, especially with lighting in the 18th, 19th century. We talked about some of these things. One of them was the magic lantern. As you can see here, I've got an example where you would basically have a candle and you would have a light and then light it up. And then obviously this vent here was to keep the smoke to go that way. And then the light would be projected out of this tube here, and then you would have like little slots here where you have like a little show, pictures of a story, and then you would use that as a way in the 1600s. It kind of pull back a little bit, you can kind of see this picture a bit more where you can project the image, and you can kind of tell your story. Maybe sometimes there was a storybook that comes with it or lines that you could kind of tell the children, and so that was our early forms of animation at that point in time. Then we kind of talked about this, the Tama Rope, Tama Mat Rope. The Tama Mat Rope was basically kind of they had the image in the 1824 on two sides. Basically, you had one image of a cage here, and the other side was the image of a bird, and then you kind of wind the rope, and then you kind of pull on the rope, and then the picture would flip. And as it flipped, it would look like, they would combine the two images and it looked like the bird is in the cage. We talked about the phonoscope. The phonoscope was basically do you remember the device with the disc that had different images? You move the disc and then it would make the images move. That was early on as well. Then you would have flip books were part of that. So you just draw each individual image and then you flip it and then you would make the image come alive. We also saw these little devices as well. The praxinoscope, where basically each individual individual picture was coming off of these mirrors here, and you move the device, the wheel here, really fast, and it would the image would come alive in the mirrors. So, but really, animation would come about really not to its full form in cinema until the 1920s. Or sorry, yeah, well, 1920s mostly. I mean, we see in the early 1900s, it's kind of played around with a little bit. You see certain studios are coming together. Some animated studios in New York are putting together different types of animation. We see Mighty Mouse. Here I come to save the day. Many of you may not know that. Look up Mighty Mouse on YouTube. Mighty Mouse is pretty cool. Really well known in the early 1920s, 30s. Woody Woodpecker definitely came about around this time. Betty Boop came around this time. But really, you didn't. They mostly started out as like comic strips, but then eventually got animated into on the cinema screen. It really wasn't until 1914. This guy right here, this dinosaur you see in this picture, um, basically Gertie the dinosaur. Really, did we see that animation was possible? So Gertie the dinosaur was considered the first cartoon feature, or first cartoon character ever featured in a film. And then later on, Felix the cat came about. Then we saw Felix's buddy Oswald. Felix, I believe, is a Universal creation. And what's really funny is that as we're going to talk about, animation, we're going to talk about Disney, Walt Disney. A lot of people forget that Walt Disney didn't. He was an animator, but he didn't just like, oh, I'm going to create my own studio and just make all this money. And, it was a process for Walt Disney. Him and Ub Iwerks were best buds, and they worked over at Universal. They were on projects of like Felix the Cat and many other things. And Ub and him created, I believe, what is called Oswald the Rabbit. And Oswald was really popular. Early on at Universal, going into the 1920s, and they had a lot of success with him. And then Disney and Ub and or no Disney, what was Walt Disney? Walt Disney goes in there. Hey, we made you money with Oswald. We'd like to do more projects. We would like to do this. I'd like to do that, and really wanted to kind of get promoted and have these moments and success. But Universal was kind of like, get out of here. We don't need, no, you go back to work. You do what we tell you. And so basically Walt was like, okay, I'm out of here. I'm creating my own studio. Him and his brother Roy basically co-founded what is Walt Disney Productions. And then Ub Iwerks, he brings up Iwerks. And it's really interesting because there's a show on Comedy Central. I'm not going to tell you which history show it is. I'm pretty sure you can figure it out. But there is actually an episode that talks about this. And basically, Walt Disney quits Universal and is like, Ub, I need you to come with me. Ub, will you come? And so he does. He's like, yeah, dude, you're my friend. I love you. I'm going to go. And so they go and they're in their studio. And when I mean my studio, I don't mean like, oh, this grand studio like we have today. Like, I mean, it's a small, like almost like office-like studio like you see here in my office. And basically they're like jamming out ideas, and Ub Iwerks like, what about a mouse? And that's where they come up with Mickey Mouse. And then ultimately they come up with their first feature, which is Steamboat Willie, back in 1923. And this is Walt Disney Studios in Los Angeles County, California in 1923. A little bit different Los Angeles than what it is today, but very successful. And we see that eventually Steamboat Willie would come to about 1928, but they create Mickey Mouse, and ultimately they become successful with that. Now, to be fair, we do see that even though Walt Disney is gaining success, he isn't fully successful until we get to Snow White. I do want to let you know a little fun fact here before we move on to the golden age of animation. So we go back to a little bit of Oswald the Rabbit. So again, Ub Iwerks and him created Oswald. They could never get Universal back. get Oswald back from Universal. And so they've tried to make deals with Universal to get their creation back. And Universal's like, no, he's our property. You're not having him. Sorry. We're keeping Oswald the Rabbit, which is really funny that they're fighting over an animated character. But here's the funny thing about this. Okay, so fast forward, and I want to say this was right around 2006, because this is funny, because I was doing my student teaching around this. This is a really funny story. So anyway, NBC bought the rights for Sunday Night Football, okay? And guess who did Sunday Night Football for a long time? Oh, wait, that was ESPN. What is ESPN owned by? ABC, right. Okay, so Al Michaels, so anyway, Al Michaels was doing Monday Night Football. He wasn't doing Sunday Night Football, but Al Michaels was such a well-known figure for ESPN, and here's NBC, owned by Universal, and ABC, which owns ESPN, is owned by Disney. Do you see where I'm coming from? So Universal realizes we need a name. Al Michaels is the guy right now in football when it comes, because it's Monday Night Football. Everybody loves Monday Night Football. We need Al Michaels in primetime, because guess what was going to happen? Monday Night Football was on ABC, was going to be pushed to ESPN because ESPN played Sunday Night Football. So, and trust me, there's a point to this story. It's really funny. Anyway, so they realized that Al Michaels was no longer going to be in prime time on a major local network. So they thought of an opportunity. Let's trade for Al Michaels. Let's bring Al Michaels in. He'll be the guy on NBC for Sunday Night Football, which you can catch, right now. Well, hopefully in the fall. So anyway, but what does ESPN ABC do with this? Okay, they go, okay, fine. We will trade you Al Michaels, the rights for Al Michaels. This is really funny, because if you're Al Michaels, you're kind of going, wait a minute, I'm being traded? What? We'll trade the rights to Al Michaels to such ESPN Universal, but in exchange for Oswald the Rabbit, which was created by Walt Disney and Universal back in the early 1900s, early 1900s. And what does Universal do? You got him. So they trade Oswald the Rabbit for Al Michaels to be on Sunday Night Football. So pretty hilarious that Walt Disney finally gets his rabbit back, but it was through a NFL Al Michaels trade that got it. So that's the point of the story, how crazy it is. But Oswald the Rabbit, which was created by Walt Disney a long time ago, did eventually get back to Disney, but it came through an Al Michaels trade. So anyway, fun story. Thought I should share that. It's hilarious. But and look it up. Trust me, it's real. During the Golden Age, which we talk about 1930s, 1950s, why is this the Golden Age of animation? Why? Because of popular culture. What came out during this time? Well, Mickey Mouse expanded. We see that Mickey, Walt's like, hey, Mickey Mouse is popular, but we need to get Mickey some friends. Right now, he only has like Pete, that cat-looking dude who's kind of the bad guy, and then there's Minnie. But we need more. So they create, Donald Duck. They create Goofy. They create Pluto and all those characters. Plus, during that time, you see MGM, Warner Brothers get in the game. We see Fleischer gets in the game. So, Warner Brothers, what do they create? Looney Tunes, okay? Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Elmer Fudd. We see Betty Boop is created and Popeye created by Fleischer. We see MGM also in the game. So we see these different types of characters being created, and especially in the 1930s, Merry Melodies, the different cartoon shorts. Because, before a movie was played, sometimes they had a short, and a lot of times the shorts were cartoons, animated. And a lot of the animated films were not feature films. They were shorts. And so a lot of those shorts were played before big movies, and that's where the Looney Tunes came to be. So, all those classic cartoons that we love with Bugs Bunny, my kids like them when we try to watch them, even though they're super violent and we have to kind of censorize them, but they're so popular, well known, that rabbit season, duck season, rabbit season, duck season, and all the shenanigans of Bugs Bunny. Those were played before feature films. And then eventually they were collected and obviously rerun on television and Cartoon Network and all that stuff. So that's how the Looney Tunes came to be. But this is the golden age of animation, is these characters, the Mickey Mouses, the Donald Ducks, the Goofies, the Daffy Ducks, the Bugs Bunnies, all the Looney Tunes, the Betty Boops, the Popeyes. This is the golden age of animation. But really, so a lot of that animation was shorts. It wasn't until the 1930s that we see Snow White really come onto the scene. And we learned a little bit about this when we talked about the golden age of film, when I showed you CNN, the movies, which I really encourage you to, if you have YouTube TV or wherever you have your cable television or satellite, really look up CNN, the movies, rewatch some of that stuff. There's a lot of cool stuff with cinema there. It's on CNN, so maybe like CNN On Demand, go check it out. But we see that what happened in animated film was in 1937, the release of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Now, Walt Disney put in over $1.5 million to make this movie in 1937. I know a lot of you are like, well, it's just $1.5 million. That's not a lot for movie studios today. I mean, animated movies are made more. But you have to understand, inflation and things like that's definitely well over $30 million today, putting into an animated movie. And this was Walt Disney's first animated movie. So he invested a lot of his personal money into this film. And if it failed, well, the studio would crumble. And no more Mickey Mouse, no more Donald Duck, no more of what we enjoy today. So he invests a lot of money in this hand-drawn animated film, which took about 1.5 million cells to create or animate. And what ends up happening? The film grosses over $66 million. Okay, so they gain a profit of roughly over, what is it, about $64 million. That's a huge gain. And what it does is it shows that that animated films can work. And two, it helped Walt Disney invest in other movies like we know today, the classics like Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, and then all the way up to what we know now as Frozen. So this changed the game for not just cinema, but also for Walt Disney. So a big, massive change for the movie industry, especially animated. And I think if you did inflation today, I want to say that so the $66 million that they made at the box office is roughly over $400 million today. So that's a lot of money. So just thinking about it, that's a lot of money. But what this did is not only all these great new animated films come to be, but also we see television is now, because of animation is becoming, over the years, becoming a lot more easier to animate and less expensive because of the new techniques that are being created in hand-drawing animation. We're seeing American television looking for content to put on its screens. And so we see that television or animation industry is adapted on television. And we start to see certain studios come to be and produce some great animation that is not only played on primetime TV, but also on the Disney Channel, Nickelodeon, what we know today. And a lot of that success has to go back to the Flintstones. And we see that Hanna-Barbera releases the Flintstones, the first animated series in primetime television in 1960. And this was huge because it was a big family gathering show that they would show first off like at 7 o'clock Central Time. You gather as a family to watch the Flintstones. And then you would have your next favorite shows. But once the Flintstones were done, you'd be like, okay, the Flintstones are done. Go to bed, kids. And then mom and dad got to stay up and watch, a Dick Van Dyke show or whatever, I Dream of Jeannie, and I keep forgetting the one with the woman who's a witch who would twinkle her nose or whatever. But those sitcoms would come after the Flintstones. But the Flintstones prove that you can have a successful animated television show. And that opened the doors for 1961 Yogi Bear to have hits, and also bring in the Looney Tunes back in certain ways, and then the Pink Panther, um, which was known as the Pink Fink back in the day. But anyway, the Pink Panther series also came to be known during that time. Um, Also, what we have to understand about modern animation, we have to go a little bit back into computer animation. Um, we start to see the animation at the beginning was 2D animation, where it's basically on paper. You can only go a certain dimension. Yeah, you can show some 3D depth. There's some depth to the animation. There's some 3D aspects to it, but it was still 2D animation, hand-drawn animation. But we start to see by the late 80s that the computer systems are becoming more sophisticated, that you're able to play around and create new stop motion, virtual stop motion animation. And we start to see that 2D is being not only drawn on computers, but then starting to be played with 3D modeling. And we see in 1984 the adventures of Andre and Wally B, short film, which was created in CG animation by the graphics group, the predecessor to what is known as Pixar today. So that really starts to change the game in animation as well. But what really hit the scene, because the Flintstones, the Jetsons, like they were popular in the 60s and into the 70s, but eventually animation kind of fades away and modern TV, and we're starting to see, the sophistication of adults are going, I really don't want to watch the Flintstones at 7 o'clock. My kids aren't up at this point in time. My kids go to bed right at 7 or before 7 o'clock or in their rooms at 7 o'clock. I don't want to watch the Flintstones or the Jetsons. I'm more sophisticated. And so we start to see that certain animators are realizing, okay, our audience is a lot smarter. They're a lot brighter. And so we can play around with the idea of more modern American animation. And that's where The Simpsons come in 1987. Now, they were created as a animated sitcom by Matt Groening from Fox Company. He first did The Simpsons on the Tracy Ullman Show. It was a skit comedy show. It came on in the 80s, mid 80s. And basically, during in between skits, they would have this cartoon called The Simpsons, where they had these little shorts called The Simpsons. And this is what they originally looked like back in the day. And I know a lot of you are looking at that picture and going, that's not The Simpsons. Yes, it is. Trust me, that was The Simpsons back in the day on the Tracy Ullman Show. But eventually they evolved into this Simpsons as we know them today. And they ultimately got their own run in the late 80s. And then up until now, that's the longest running American scripted primetime show today. But what I think the Simpsons proved is that you can go a little bit more sophisticated with your animation. And because of the Simpsons, we have the Family Guy, which came out in the late 90s, which was a little bit more sophisticated, dealing with pop culture references and things like that, then ultimately leading to Bob's Burgers and a lot of, eventually like Adult Swim, which you see on Cartoon Network at night, more adult animated humor, like Robot Chicken, even clay animation and toys and stuff like that. It really changed the game. Though it really factored in animation was obviously Pixar. Pixar was the studio that changed the game for animation, going all the way back in 1995 when I was in middle school. Crazy how old this movie is. My kids loved all the Toy Story movies, and don't get me wrong, I love Toy Story too, and it's a big part of my heart. But I just go back and go, man, I thought this movie came out when I was in high school, not in middle school. I forget that it came out in 1995. And man, it just ages me so much. But it's pretty crazy. But this was your first fully computer animated feature on film, because before that it was kind of like back with going back to Walt Disney with Mickey Mouse and the Warner Brothers. Animation on film was shorts. They were not very long at all. You just had short films. Now this is a full animated computer generated film. Our first animated film was 1937 with Snow White. And then it took, what, gosh, is that doing the math here? you are looking at about 58 years. Took about 58 years to finally get your first fully computer animated feature. Now, a lot of that has to do with the technology. Technology wasn't there, but and you look at like computers really weren't invented, uh, until the 60s, and then your first personal computer wasn't invented until like 1984. But think about that though, in the span of 10 years though, with your personal computer of 1984 with Apple coming out and IBM, and then you have Pixar using that technology in 1995. In a span of 10 years, you come up with your first animated film. It's pretty quite an achievement. But Pixar Animation, which people think, oh, well, that was Disney owned. No, it wasn't actually. Steve Jobs, he had once. This is okay. So it's funny. He created Apple. He got then voted out of Apple by the board of directors. Well, what Steve Jobs does is when he's not working with Apple, he starts investing in other companies. He creates his own computer company. And one of his investments was Pixar Animation. And Pixar Animation creates this feature film. And they go, we want to release this thing. And they're working on this. And it's funny. People think, well, they worked on it in 1994, released in 95. No, Tom Hanks will tell you they worked on this thing since like 1991, 1992. And when, Tim Allen, who's Buzz Lightyear, he was, popular at that time with Home Improvement. They did the voices back like since like 1991 or 1992. And it wasn't until like 3 years later that they got after doing those recordings, that they got to finally see their voices on screen. So, but Pixar creates this film. They want to release it. They do this distribution contract with Disney that we'll release this film with you guys. If it's successful, we'll do another film. We're working on different projects, and then we'll work with Walt Disney. And basically, that's what ended up happening. The partnership of them coming together. Pixar made the movies. Disney released them. Eventually, what ends up happening is Walt Disney comes out with a lot of duds. Disney films used to be the hit. But then, 2D animation, some of their 2D films were flopping. They tried 3D, Chicken Little. I know some people love that movie. I do not like that movie a lot. It's not my favorite. My kids love it. But anyway, it was a dud. But they come up with so many duds, and Pixar is becoming this huge hit. And they're realizing Pixar's like, we don't need Disney anymore. We can distribute our own films. Well, Disney's like, well, crud, we have Toy Story, and we've been using Toy Story for a lot of our revenue, and not just for just the box office, but also the merchandise. And so they scramble and they buy up Pixar. Luckily, they were able to do that in January 2006. But what did that do? It changed the game, guys. Pixar changed the game because even though Disney, with the purchase of Pixar, Disney was able to take John Lasseter from Pixar and move him over to Disney Studios. And so, because at that point, John Lasseter realized, I don't need to be at Pixar. Those guys, they've got so many good, smart, bright people. They're creating great movies. I'm going to take my talents to Disney, help them get back on track after the dud with Chicken Little, as you can see, he's right there. And they start to create some new hits like Big Hero 6, Tangled, which I love. Those movies are great. And then eventually what we know as Frozen today. But Big Hero 6 was a big, huge hit, winning the Oscar in 2015. And little typo there, forgot the 6. But anyway, but we see that that Pixar changed the game for animation, because no longer, not to say that 2D is not necessary and that you don't need 2D animators, but the technology has come so far that we as a society prefer more the 3D animation more than the 2D animation. And so this is where we've come today in our society. So, but anyway, that does it for animation. So we have gone through it. But what I need you to do is please go to Google Classroom and make sure that you type in your answers there. Look for my cinema history and the Google form for this animation questions. The main thing is make sure on number 8, before you submit everything, that you watch an animated movie. Pick an animated movie right now. You got some time here. You got Disney Plus. Frozen 2's out right now. Here in, I think, about a week or two, they're going to release Trolls World Tour on Digital Home. You will have to pay $20. So I mean, I understand if you can't pay $20 to pay for that movie to watch it. For it's a rental technically, or you only have access to it for 48 hours. But we can't go to the movie theaters. So anyway, but at least you save money on popcorn. So maybe take your popcorn money and your candy money that you would spend at the movie theater and use that for Trolls. You can watch that, or you can find some on Netflix or whatever. Just let me know. But find something that would be school appropriate. Keep it at least PG-13 um, or lower. Don't do. We're no rated R animated films here, people. So I'm gonna actually update that here. Watch a animated movie. Let's go G-rated. G to PG-13. I do not want any R-rated movies. Okay, so watch an animated movie. Just kind of explain the film. Tell us about it. What you think about it by giving your review of the film. Just give it a good critique of it. Don't give me it was okay. Tell me why it was okay. Tell me why you loved it. Tell me what made it great. What was disappointing about it. And then just tell me why did you choose it. So that's going to be part of number 8 on the Google Forms. So be sure to do that assignment as well. Like I said, I missed you guys. Really wish I could be there to watch these movies with you, but it is what it is. It happens. Life is gonna change in so many different directions. And you gotta find the best move to make it positive and what the best move for you and what's best for what's coming up. But hopefully you guys are doing great. Stay safe and catch me next time when we talk more movies. Peace out. See you guys.